No, I said you asked me about one diagram. You asked me if I needed to know all the water-soluble hormones in that diagram. And what did I say to you? No, you don't need to know that. But you need to know what all those hormones do and who makes all those hormones. But for that particular diagram, that water-soluble diagram, no, you don't have to know all of the hormones. Yep, it was the diagram where we described how water-soluble hormones work. So it was this one. Yep. And you asked me, do you have to know all the hormones in this diagram? And I said, no, you don't. Well, that's.
You did understand me because I asked.
Okay. Well, now do you understand me? Good. Absolutely. So yes, you have to know that. Everybody good with what you need to know? Everybody so far understand the difference between the mechanism of action, because that's what another general thing you need to know from this chapter. So water-soluble hormones set up second messenger systems. And which second messenger system do I want you to know down pat? Yeah, this guy, cyclic AMP. Okay, that one I want you to know. So I want you to know all the players involved in that second messenger system. But I also want you to understand that that's not the only one. I'm not going to make you memorize the other ones, because once you have one down, they're pretty much all the same. You just have to change things like what the second messenger is or what the enzyme is. They're different in different second messenger systems. They also describe for you the PIP2 calcium signaling mechanism. Again, same principle, second messenger system with a G protein. But there's different second messengers and enzymes. Not going to make you memorize that. Okay? Target cells. We talked about cells have to have what on them in order to be considered a target? Receptors for what? Whatever hormone we're talking about. Okay? So some of those receptors are related to lipid-soluble hormones, and they'll allow the hormone to do what? Yeah, come into the cell. And where's a lipid-soluble hormone going to make its difference?
In the lipid membrane.
Nope. It's coming in, and where's it going to make a difference? In the nucleus. Okay, it's gonna go right to that genetic material and make its difference there. So what's going to happen is the protein that's produced from the transcription and translation of DNA is going to be a different protein. And that's lipid soluble, exactly. So water soluble never gets in the cell. Ooh, scary.
My phone's like going off severe thunderstorm warning.
Is it? Yeah, no kidding. No, go ahead. Just in case lightning comes through the window. So water-soluble hormones never come into the cell. They start the ball rolling cell doing something different when they come in contact with their receptor, and they set off that second messenger system series of reactions within the cell. Yes? The tree's protecting us there. Don't worry. All right? Until it comes down and on us. I almost had one of those at my house. Okay. So there's different ways that hormones can act. All right? Yeah, you got to push on it and then it comes. It's a weird window. And this diagram on page 597, figure 16.4, shows us the different ways that hormones do their thing. So, hormones can have humoral stimulus. And what's humoral stimulus mean? First of all, what's a humor? It's some sort of liquid in the body. Humors was referred to, blood, for example, was referred to as a humor in the body. So when we talk about humoral stimulus, what is that? Yeah, we release the hormone into some kind of fluid, and then it's done, and then it does what?
And then it like stimulates.
It's going to travel through those humors and then eventually come in contact with the target. Okay? So that's one way that hormones do their job. And remember, bottom line, what are hormones doing to the cell? Changing what they do. Changing what they're doing right now. Causing them to either speed up something or slow something down or release a product that they might make. The other kind of stimulus comes directly from the nervous system. What do we call that? Neural stimulus. So the nervous system can directly send a message, in this example here, to the adrenal glands. And that nervous system stimulus will cause that gland to secrete its product. Yes? Yes, stress can cause release from the adrenals, yes. And then the last but not least, hormones can cause other hormones to release. And that's called what? Hormonal stimulus. And one of the best examples they give us up in this diagram. The pituitary gland, the anterior pituitary gland, and we're going to talk about the difference in a minute, releases certain hormones. It releases a whole bunch of hormones. But there are specific hormones that then go to stimulate other endocrine glands to secrete their product. So for example, TSH is a product of the adrenals. What does it do for a living? It stimulates what? Yeah, the thyroid to do its thing. Gonads. Reproductive organs. What are some of the hormones that are going to help it do its thing? Things like follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. These are all hormones that are going to help the reproductive organs mature their cells for reproduction. So hormones can cause other actions in endocrine glands themselves. Yes? So 3 different kinds again: humoral, floating around in the blood; neural, nervous system, direct stimulus; or hormones can also stimulate hormone release. Yes? All right, next. Now it's time to talk about each of the different endocrine glands, what they make, and what happens. Before I do that, make sure you also remember that change can be caused in the body by the nervous system, but also the endocrine system. And the hormones, those chemicals that are released, have what we call a half-life. They're not going to last forever and ever and ever. Eventually, what's going to happen to them? If they're not going to last forever and ever, think chemical. Like, let me give you an example. Neurotransmitter in the synapse when you study the nervous system. Yeah. So what happened to acetylcholine in the synapse? Did it last forever and ever? What happened to it? Who broke it down? There was an enzyme. What was the name of the enzyme? Acetylcholine esterase, right? Okay. So there are some enzymes that will also break down hormones, and then they'll just naturally break down with age too as well. No, that's a whole different deal. Thymus is getting smaller after most of its job is done. And most of its job is done at a very young age. So, they talk about half-life a little bit, and that's the only thing I want to say about that. Remember, we have interactions between hormones and their target, and they can either slow things down or speed things up. So there's a couple of terms there that you should understand. Permissive, synergism, and that's working together. And antagonism would be, working against or slowing things down. That's page 598 interactions of hormones at the target. Okay?
You said
Permissive, synergism, and antagonism. So hormones will stimulate things to happen, or there'll be some sort of partnership, two groups working together, or they'll stop something from happening, antagonism. Yes? All right, first endocrine gland of interest is the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus. Where do we find these guys? Not the back. Middle. Think middle brain regions. Okay? They're hanging off the hypothalamus, that diencephalon region. Does that ring a bell? Okay. So they're in the middle. And why do you think they're in the middle? Yeah, this is a group of hormones that controls a lot of things in the body. So it's got nice placement because it's very protected by all the rest of the brain matter in those middle brain regions. Good design. So the pituitary gland has two parts. It's got a front part, it's got a back part. The front part is called the anterior pituitary gland. Another name for the pituitary gland is something called the hypophysis. So the front part, anterior pituitary gland, is also called the what? Correct. Adenohypophysis. Now, the business end of making hormones in the pituitary gland happens in the anterior pituitary gland. So when I look at it under the microscope, what I'm going to see is that glandular material, those nice big fat cells that are actually producing hormones that will then be released from the anterior pituitary gland. The other part of the pituitary gland, the back end, is called the posterior pituitary gland. Another name for it is the neurohypophysis, because this part isn't actually making hormones, so we're not going to see those nice big fat cells that are pumping out hormone. It's actually a storage area for hormones. It's called the neurohypophysis. Neuro. Posterior, yep. Now, read in your book. What does it say? Posterior lobe plus the infundibulum. That's the thing the pituitary gland hangs off of. Makes up a region called the neurohypophysis, a term commonly used incorrectly to indicate the posterior lobe alone. So it's not the posterior lobe that term refers to. It refers to the whole gland. What we're going to find in the posterior lobe, though, is neurons, or parts of neurons, I should say.
So the neurohypophysis is the whole.
It's the whole, yes. Now the back end, the posterior end, makes, or they call neurohormones. It doesn't really make hormones, it stores hormones. Who makes the hormones that the posterior pituitary gland stores? Nope.
Who stores what?
Who makes the hormones that are stored? Exactly. Look at the diagram. The hypothalamus, you can see those little axons that are running down to the posterior portion. The hypothalamus, those neurons, are actually making the hormones that are stored in the posterior pituitary gland. Okay? So the front, anterior, makes a bunch of hormones. The posterior basically stores it. We'll release the hormones from there when they're needed. So they go on then to talk about the pituitary gland and its hypothalamic relationship. Well, that's kind of its connection. The hypothalamus is making some of those hormones and being stored in the posterior pituitary gland. They're also physically connected to each other. So posterior pituitary gland and hypothalamic hormones are described first in your textbook. Oxytocin. What's that doing for a living? It's what?
Helps for pain.
Well, helps create pain. What does it do? Stimulates uterine contractions. And also, as a second, one of its synergistic jobs, stimulates what? Did anybody read? Yeah, milk ejection or drop. So during labor, who's the guy that's going to help me? There you go, oxytocin. Who makes it? No. The hypothalamus makes it. Who releases it?
The posterior.
Posterior pituitary. Good job.
Hold on, slow down. I gotta write this.
So remember, posterior doesn't make it. It just stores it and releases it. So if I asked, here's the tricky part. If I ask you, where is oxytocin stored? Who makes oxytocin? Good. The next one is antidiuretic hormone. What's that for? ADH. What's yeah? So when you say that word, impedes urine formation, what's that mean?
Inhibit?
Inhibit.
I said inhibit.
Oh, inhibit. So what is it doing?
It stops urine formation.
And urine formation will be doing what? To your water. Think about water balance. When I form urine, why do I form urine?
To get rid of grease.
Exactly. Get rid of excess water. So when do you think I'd make antidiuretic hormone and release antidiuretic hormone?
When the water when there's too much water in the or whatever.
If there's too much water and I don't let me release it, what's going to happen? I'm going to explode. Antidiuretic hormone. Opposite. Yes. Why? Again, to maintain water balance. So when would you need to retain water? When you're, yeah, exactly. When you haven't been drinking enough. Yeah, you were opposite. You're thinking opposite. So antidiuretics hormone is going to help me hold on to more water.
So when people are like, well, I work at the hospital and we have a lot of people that like have too much water volume, so they're given Lasix to.
And that's going to affect your kidneys.
Right. So is that when they're like holding on to that water, retaining that water, is that a hormonal effect that their body's having?
Not necessarily. It might be a physiological effect between circulatory system and uptake of fluid. So your patients that have edema, there might be problems with blood pressure. There might be respiratory problems that are causing shifts in their pressure that aren't allowing them to get those excess fluids that typically leave the circulatory system and go into the extremities to get them back into the circulatory system. So what your diuretics are going to do is going to cause you to secrete more of that excess fluid and hopefully draw or equalize that pressure that are going to help draw more of those fluids out. Yep. I don't know the specific medication, but that's what it affects. It's going to affect, when we talk about the renal system, we're going to talk about nephrons and their absorption and reabsorption back into the circulatory system. So some of those drugs will affect that rate so that the kidneys will excrete more water and hopefully draw some of that water that's hanging out in the extremities back into the circulatory system.
We have like a resident, he's on dialysis and he has like a fluid restriction right now. Does that have to do with the circulatory system?
And it has to do with his ability to balance osmotic osmolality, the amount of dissolved substances in his system. So if he has trouble getting rid of excess water, we have to be careful not to let him drink excess water. So you have to control their fluid intake.
So would that have to do with this?
There's a million reasons why. Guessing, it probably has something to do with pressure in his system. So is he a diabetic or? Because a lot of times diabetes, one of the secondary effects, because the kidneys are overworking themselves trying to get rid of all that excess glucose, they slow down faster, and then you have problems with water balance. And then they end up having to go on dialysis. They have a higher risk. You see higher incidence of dialysis. It's doing what the kidneys do for you. So you're taking your blood volume and you're filtering out the toxins that your kidneys would normally do because you have, again, decreased renal function or problems with pressure in the system. So you can't do it properly for yourself.
Yeah, they can't urinate on their own.
Yeah. Or their kidneys are not efficient at clearing the excess materials they're supposed to clear. So basically, a machine is doing it for you. Did you have a question?
Well, you were saying that they couldn't like urinate on their own and stuff. Would that be
Well, it depends. There's different stages. You know, sometimes patients can urinate on their own, but they're not clearing enough. So they can still urinate a little bit. So there's different levels. You might have to go on dialysis even though you can still urinate on your own. So. Okay? Yep.
So, we need to memorize this chart in a nutshell. 16.1.
I'm gonna, you know what? You want to know who your breast friend is going to be in this chapter? The tables.
Right, that's what I mean.
So page 602, 603, table 16.1. That's going to be your best friend in this. The pictures are nice because they're going to help. Yes,
That's what we need to know.
you got it.
Because it says where it's made, and then, so the target is what it's doing.
Yep, what it affects.
Yeah.
But understand what it's doing at the target.
So like,
Not just my target is the uterus. Well, what's it doing?
I was going to ask you, so like for oxytocin, example is the uterus is the target, but it's stimulating labor.
Correct. And look at that awesome table.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's right
what
there.
happens.
And that's, again, when you study for this class, this is how we want to make our information small. And the tables in this chapter are very helpful.
No, actually, what do you mean, what do you think about table 16?
Well, I don't know. We're not there yet. Once we get there, I'm talking about the anterior and posterior pituitary gland now. We'll get there. That's a little bit different.
There's a lot of information. I don't think that
Yeah.
you have to know everything.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what. Yep. Okay? So anterior pituitary gland. So everybody understands what posterior does. Again, doesn't make it, stores it, know the hormones it stores and what they do. Anterior pituitary gland. Huh? Yep. That guy's easy. The other guy, not so easy. Now the anterior pituitary gland, sometimes called what? The adenohypophysis, but also sometimes called the master endocrine gland, because it produces a lot of hormones that are then going to do what? Yeah, control a lot of what goes on in the other endocrine glands. So, the anterior pituitary gland, and you're going to see this when you look at it under the microscope, looks very different. Again, we're going to see those nice big fat glandular cells that are actually making these hormones. And who are the hormones that it makes? Well, you can see them all in this diagram. Or you can see them all on your table. So I'm going to use the table to kind of go through them. Growth hormone. What's growth hormone doing for me? It's going to have some effects on who? Metabolic rate, chemistry. It's going to have a lot to do with effects on things like glucose levels, getting glucose to cells. Think metabolism when you think growth hormone.
I'm not trying to like ask a question or trying to talk, but
You can do that, you know.
no, like I work in the ER, so they ask to do a metabolic panel.
Mhm.
So is that just like a regular metabolic panel on a patient just to see their levels?
It depends on the hospital, but metabolic panel might include they might include thyroid hormones or these groups of hormones from the anterior. It depends on the hospital. So what you can do is go in the computer and look and see exactly what that means.
We get that a lot for like trauma patients, and they do a metabolic panel.
Yep. So it depends on what your hospital is calling that. So unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that, but go in and look what the tests are, and then you'll be able to answer that question for yourself. Like some hospitals say chemistry panel, well, that's not the same for every hospital. So look and see what they mean. They might even include electrolytes and things like that in your metabolic panel. So that's a tough question to answer.
All right, I was just wondering.
Yeah, but it could be some of these, I don't know.
Okay.
All right, so growth hormone, that's going to help growth. Liver, it's going to affect liver function. Bone, cartilage, muscle. When you're small and you need to get big, what do you need to do to get big? Grow more of this, and growth hormone is going to play a big role in it. So it's not just you getting big, it's things like your organs maturing and things like that. So deficiencies in this hormone can cause all sorts of problems with underformed organ systems and dwarfism. And the opposite can happen when there's too much. Giantism is mentioned in your book as well. No, these are made in the anterior pituitary gland. Big fat cells pumping out hormones. And again, it'll make more sense when you look at the histology slide, because you'll see, when you look at the anterior pituitary gland, you can see big cells. It's glandular material. When you look at the posterior, you're going to see it looks like axons almost. Okay?
Is it released by the anterior tube, or is it?
Correct. And if you look at the diagram, you can see how vascular the anterior pituitary gland is. So this is going to secrete its hormones where? Into the blood. So this has a humoral effect, but it also is going to have these hormones are also going to have a hormonal effect on other organs.
Do you need to memorize all of this releasing hormone that's made by actually hypothalamus too,
Yep.
in order to release actually growth hormone
Yes.
as well? It's complicated.
Yep. And it's in, but that's what I mean. It's in the table. So that's a nice part. It makes it small for you. So use your book.
You don't want this category.
The hypo or hypersecretion. That's interesting. It's interesting information. That's not crap.
No, I said it'll make you cry.
Oh, it'll make you cry. No, that's the easy part. Okay, so who's next? By the way, this diagram sort of gives you an idea of how complex the interactions are with growth hormones. But see, I like visual things. So when I look at a picture and I say, oh yeah, that's how they're all connected. Try to use these diagrams to help you with this chapter, because sometimes a picture can be 1,000 words, or whatever that expression is, right? So growth hormone and its interactions is going to have effect on liver, other tissues, insulin-like growth factors. Those are going to help get glucose into my cells so I can make what at a faster rate? Energy at a faster rate. That's going to help my skeletal muscles. That's going to have extraskeletal muscles. It's also going to have actions that affects fat metabolism. Now, fat metabolism, what's that doing for me? Yeah, it's another energy source, exactly. Carbohydrate metabolism. Why do I metabolize carbohydrates? Energy, yes? See the connection? And again, it's nice when you see it all together in one picture. So, that is growth hormone. Some homeostatic imbalances, again, that they mentioned there. You can see some pictures. I don't think I have a diagram of it. But if you look on page 605, figure 16.7, we see the two extremes. Decreased production can result in dwarfism. Increased production can result in giantism. So we see the two extremes here. The other one, next one in line, thyroid stimulating hormone. And guess what that does? Stimulates the thyroid to do its thing. Another one, adrenocorticotropic hormone. Who's that going to stimulate? The adrenal glands. Again, we'll talk about each of these guys separate. I just want your general definition for these guys. Gonadotropins, FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, luteinizing hormone. Who are they going to stimulate? The gonads, not just women. Not just women. Yeah, exactly. The gonads. In males, that's the testes. In females, that's the ovaries. So that's going to help the cells, reproductive cells, kick into meiosis. That ringing a bell?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So meiosis is the cell division that's going to result in a reproductive cell. It's going to result in a cell that has how many chromosomes? 23 chromosomes. The way I refer to it, it's kind of double mitosis without the interphase in between. A lot simpler, isn't it? So they're the same steps, interphase, metaphase, telophase, da, 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 da. But the second splitting, we don't give the cell a chance to reproduce its genetic material. So the second splitting, meiosis, has all the same phases, but they have a tube beside them. And that's the only difference, pretty much. Prolactin. That's also going to help us with what? Milk production, exactly. So again, use your table. Know the hormones. Know what they do for a living. Next, who's this guy? Thyroid.
You said we're gonna go through them again,
Well, we're going to go through, we just talked about all the different glands that were stimulated by the hormones secreted by the anterior pituitary gland, right? So now we're going to go through the glands separately.
Yeah, that's right, but you didn't pay attention to the this adrenocorticotropic hormone.
I think that's, yeah.
You just mentioned what you didn't
Yep,
know, but-
you need to know that too.
No, I know, but can you repeat what
It's going to help with what? Stimulation of who? The adrenal glands. I think I did say that, didn't I? Yep. So, the next guy, so we're done with the master, yes? And that's probably the most difficult one with respect to things I need to remember. The next one, thyroid gland. Now, thyroid gland's a little bit strange. It has glandular material, produces hormones. What are the hormones? T3 and T4. Okay, so thyroid hormones, T3, triiodothyronine, and T4, thyroxine, are the hormones that we're going to talk about right now. There's another one it makes too. We'll talk about that in a minute. The thyroid gland makes hormones, but it makes them very slowly. So it's got an amazing design. The cells that produce the hormone are able to produce hormone stock in follicles that exist in the cell. So if I look at this histology slide, I see those cells, that nice glandular material, the parafollicular cells around the what? Parafollicular. Yeah, around a follicle. And the follicle is the space, and yeah, it's that simple. The space is where I'm going to store my product. Now, that is, I call it hormone soup, because this is where I'm going to store the stock for the hormones, T3, T4. This diagram on page 608 shows us the process of making thyroid hormones. This might make a lovely essay question.
Figure 1610.
Figure 1610 on page 608. So the making of thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, takes a little bit of work by the cells. If you look at this picture, this is the circulatory system here. So these are capillaries that are surrounding the thyroid. And these yellow things are the cells. This is the what? That's the soup. Yes? So that's the follicle. Important to understand as we go through the explanation, it will make more sense. So there's a couple of building blocks that I'm going to need directly from the circulatory system in order to make my thyroid hormones. One of them is iodine. So in the first beginning steps, they talk about the two parts of making thyroid hormone. The first step is making thyroglobulin. That's the part of the thyroid hormone, along with iodine, which is another part of the thyroid hormones that need to be produced. So in steps 1 and 2, we see that the synthesis of thyroglobulin is going to be happening within the cell, endoplasmic reticulum. Now, what's the endoplasmic reticulum? What'd that do for me way back when? You're thinking of transcription and translation, but think of its general description. What did the endoplasmic reticulum do for me? Yeah, it's going to transport and process proteins. If I want to package and ship them, which organelle is going to help me do that? That's my Golgi apparatus. So see how they're kind of attached? So here's the way I describe the making of thyroid hormones. And usually AMP2 is in the spring, so this is more applicable. But anybody ever have a big Super Bowl sandwich? You make a big sandwich, and then you have a bunch of people over, and you slice off the big sandwich, yes, and everybody gets a piece. So we're going to make a big thyroid hormone sandwich, just like my Super Bowl sandwich. Okay?
Sandwiches out of soup now?
we're making sandwiches that are going to go into the soup. So we're making part of the thyroid hormone, again, the thyroglobulin, in the endoplasmic reticulum, and then we're going to ship it off to the soup via the Golgi apparatus. The other part of the hormone that we're producing is going to involve iodide. We have to kind of alter it a little bit. Iodide is how it exists in the circulatory system. So we're going to trap it and bring it into the cell, alter it a little bit, and turn it into iodine. That's going to go in the soup. You with me? So I have tyrosines, part of that thyroglobulin molecule. I have iodide, another part, that are going to join together in complexes, my big Super Bowl sandwich, inside the soup. And it's going to hang out there until my guests arrive for my Super Bowl party, or until I get stimulation from the anterior pituitary gland that tells me to do what? Send it out, secrete the hormone. That part I just described takes a long, long time. So when I call for it, it's nice if I have it ready to go. If I make my big sandwich, before my guests come. Yes? When I need it, what's going to happen to it? Well, those larger complexes are going to be engulfed, put into little packages by the cell, and this is the whole endocytosis, exocytosis thing, yes? I'm going to bring it through endocytosis, back into the cell, and I'm going to use some enzymes in another little package I have, in a lysosome, to slice my sandwich. Break it up into T3s and T4s. And then what am I going to do with those T3s and T4s? Now that I've cut up my sandwich, I'm going to serve it to my company. Or in the case of the thyroid gland, I'm going to secrete that product into the circulatory system.
But it's already was T4 and T3.
Well, it's actually altered. It's DIT T2 and MIT, T1, which is it's a different complex. It's kind of like a bigger complex that needs to be altered. Again, I'm not going to get crazy with the chemistry, but I want you to understand the basis in this diagram. Okay? The tyrosine is that part that's made in the endoplasmic reticulum. The iodine is trapped. Both are added together to make thyroglobulin. So tyrosine is made in here. And then iodine is made or altered and thrown into the colloid as well. So see the tyrosines, the little purples? They're going to hook up with the iodines, the little balls, and they're going to form what? Thyroglobulin. Big Super Bowl sandwich. Again, when we call for it, when the anterior pituitary says release, I'm going to engulf it, alter it chemically, and then I'm going to release T3s and T4s. Okay? And they're a little bit different chemically. Yes? So understand the process of creating thyroid hormones. It's a little bit different than some of the other hormones. So it's kind of interesting and important for you to know. The other hormone, this, not to negate this information, which is, where is it in your book? It's on table 16.2, page 607, general information. Okay, I don't want you to know every single little detail on this, but know that it affects metabolic rate. It's basically affecting metabolism in all of these different systems. Okay? So when I have trouble with thyroid hormones, I have trouble with regulating metabolic rate. Calcitonin is another one. And that's released by parafollicular cells in the thyroid. I want to put this up. So parafollicular cells in the diagram we just saw before, or C cells, make calcitonin. And calcitonin has an effect on calcium levels in the blood. It's going to target skeleton. It's going to inhibit osteoclasts. Think about studying bone way back when. What's an osteoclast do for a living? It breaks down bone. And why is it doing that? To get more calcium in the blood. If I inhibit osteoclasts, what am I doing to the level of calcium in the blood? It's going to end up lowering it or stabilizing it indirectly. Yes? So when we talk about regulating calcium levels, calcitonin has a hand in doing what? Bringing it down. Okay? I'm going to stop breaking down so I can bring down. So if I go to Friendly's and have a giant ice cream, lots and lots of calcium. What am I going to have to do to that calcium? No, break it down. I want to do what to it? I want to break it down because it's important. I want to store it. So I don't want to cause release of more calcium from the bones, do I? No, because I have plenty in my blood. So I want to stop that, and I want to let the osteoblasts who form bone matrix suck up that extra calcium and store it in my bone matrix. Make sense?
So it brings calcium levels down in the blood.
Indirectly, yes.
It just prevents them from going up.
Correct. So the other guy, so that's the thyroid gland. T3, T4, what's the other one? Calcitonin. Parathyroid, they're kind of hanging out beside the thyroid. Also looks very different. We're not going to see the big follicles in the parathyroid gland. The glandular material is much more compact. The cells, oxyphil cells, and parathyroid cells in the parathyroid hormone, they're going to make the product. So what's the product I'm talking about? What does parathyroid hormone make?
Yeah, parathyroid.
I just answered my own question. Parathyroid hormone. That's one that makes sense. And what does parathyroid hormone or parathormone do for me? Yeah. So what would trigger the release of parathyroid hormone?
To stimulate osteoclast.
Yeah, but what would trigger the release of parathyroid hormone? When your calcium levels start to go down. So this is the other guy. When calcium levels start to go down, what do I need to do? I need to build, release. I need to break down that bone matrix. Release that calcium into the circulatory system. So when calcium levels start to fall, we're going to signal the parathyroid to release parathyroid hormone, and that's going to stimulate the osteoclasts to break down the bone matrix. That's going to help increase calcium levels in the circulatory system. Now remember, all these guys kind of have secondary jobs to do. So there's always like some other thing it's going to affect. We have to remember that. So not only are we going to have the bone effect of parathyroid hormone, osteoclasts, break down the bone matrix, increase the calcium. But wouldn't it be nice if the kidneys kind of laid off sucking out calcium and putting it in urine? So it's also, one of its secondary effects, is going to have an effect on the reabsorption rate of calcium in the kidneys. It's going to do what to that? No, reabsorption. That means putting back into the circulatory system what it took out. It's going to increase that rate. Make sense? How about the intestines?
From intestine, they will reabsorb calcium from intestine.
Or try to increase the rate at intestinal absorption of calcium as well. So these are some of the other things that same hormone does. And we're going to see that as we discuss each of the systems, we're going to say, oh yeah, I thought it did that, but yeah, it does this too. And this is a nice diagram that shows us, or gives us an example of the variety of things it affects. So that's parathyroid and the parathyroid hormone. Questions? Next, adrenals. And where do those live? They are sitting on top of the kidneys. And there's different groups of cells in different layers of the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland consists of a cortex. And what's a cortex? You have a cerebral cortex. Where's that? Yeah, kind of on the outside. And then you have a medulla oblongata. That's my favorite science word of all.
My daughter's special thing, medulla oblongata.
Is it really? Oh, yeah. Was that the water boy or something? Okay, so medulla in the middle, cortex around the outside. So we're going to see these terms repeating themselves as we go through the organ systems. And located in the different areas of the adrenals, we're going to see different zones. And you can see them in this histology slide here. The adrenal medulla, and then the zona of different cells. There's the zona reticularis, the zona fasciculata, the zona glomerulosa, and then the whole spiel is covered by some connective tissue, the capsule or membrane that surrounds it. So this is a nice diagram too because it shows you what is made. So in that outer zona glomerulosa, we see that a hormone called aldosterone is made. And then the cortisol and androgens. And what's an androgen? And this is going to have an effect on secondary sex characteristics. So when we talk about male-female, we're not only talking about their reproductive gonads, but we're talking about other characteristics male and female have, secondary sex characteristics. So some of these hormones have an effect on that as well. Epinephrine and norepinephrine, they're the speed up, slow down guys that we're going to discuss in different chapters as well. In the textbook, it breaks it down into these hormones, or broken down into a group of hormones called the mineralocorticoids. Now, aldosterone is released from the adrenal cortex. Again, that's the what? No, go ahead.
Do we need to know the epinephrine?
Yes, those are all the hormones.
No, I know, but it's not in the text. I mean, this for, not for,
It's in the textbook.
in the textbook, but, in the textbook there's no explanation like what.
Well, I think there is. Yeah, it's on,
It doesn't highlight it.
No, it's not.
oh, it doesn't do it very well.
That's why I'm
Yep.
asking you.
Well, we'll talk.
No, just in general, like a corticoids.
Yep. Well, and then there's a specific outline for certain hormones. So those are the specifics you need to know. So like, for example, aldosterone. A lot of these hormones are going to have an effect on regulating kidney function. Okay? So epinephrine, norepinephrine, if they're not in the book, then don't worry about it.
But you need to know the top one.
Yeah, and you need to know that if I ask you who makes epinephrine and norepinephrine, what are you going to say? The adrenals. I think the book,
Specifically, but just
correct. We went into more detail, I think, in the nervous system. And then we'll talk, I think, in the renal system a little bit more about them as well. All right, aldosterone then. Aldosterone is going to help regulate kidney function, water balance. And some of the things that are going to help control its release are kidneys. Believe it or not, stress. And then pressure in the circulatory system, blood pressure. We're going to talk about a hormone in this chapter that's outlined near the end called atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANP. And it is going to help regulate these guys when blood pressure goes high. Now, when blood pressure goes high, bless you, what's probably one of the fastest things I can do to bring pressure in the circulatory system down? Pee, you're exactly right. Excrete water. So who's going to be in charge of excreting excess water fast? Kidneys. Yes? So these guys are all going to work together, and sometimes their trigger is pressure in the system. Their target's going to be who? kidneys, kidney tubules. So when we talk about nephrons, when we talk about the renal system, we're going to talk about these guys in much more detail. But for now, I want you to understand that the target is the kidney tubules, and it's going to increase the absorption of sodium and water, increased calcium, potassium secretion.
Is this, again, what's the name?
Aldosterone. And what's that going to do to pressure in the system? If I increase water, I'm going to increase what? Pressure. So that's the effect this is going to have. So that's one of the major mechanisms of aldosterone. Again, who makes aldosterone? The adrenal glands. They don't do a good job of doing that, do they? When you look on page 616, table 16.3, we have a general definition of some of the effects of these hormones. So we have the mineralocorticoids, chiefly aldosterone. Then we have something called glucocorticoids and cortisol. Okay?
So they function together.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. So this table, 16.3 on page 616, gives us a general outline of those hormones that the adrenals are responsible for. And you see at the bottom catecholamines, which is another name for epinephrine, and norepinephrine. So again, we see just a general definition of what they do for a living. That's all we need to know for now, because we're going to talk about all of these guys in more detail when we talk about the systems. Yes? All right. So we talk about on page 613 something called the renin-angiotensin aldosterone mechanism. And again, that's going to be one of the major pathways that's going to help water regulation in the kidneys. Again, this mechanism we're going to talk about much more when we hit the cardiovascular system, and again when we hit the renal system. So general information now.
What do you want to, can you explain just?
Yep, just a general, basically what the book has given you in the table.
Do you need this table?
Nope, the table I told you to know, 16.3.
I'm talking about mechanism right now. This one, the not table, figure.
The one on the screen.
Yeah, one on the screen.
That's aldosterone, we just talked about that. Okay? All right, so that's the adrenals. Who do we have next? Oh, yeah. ANP, that's mentioned there on page 614. So atrial natriuretic peptide, what's that going to help us do? Regulate what? Pressure in the system, exactly. They throw it over on page 614 for some reason. Yeah, atrial natriuretic peptide. Not ANP. I know. I was like, where did they put it? And they went and stuck it way back there. Sorry about that. I backtracked. So it's I don't think they even put it in the chart. It's going to be mentioned in the other, when we talk about other in the back of the chapter. It says other endocrine glands and tissues. It's going to talk about the heart and AMP production. And for some reason, it stuck it in there too. Yep.
The AMP and is it like a diuretic or it's not like a diuretic?
Well, it's going to have an effect sort of like a diuretic, right? Because what happens, what's the description? When blood pressure rises, what do I have to do to get it down? How do I get pressure down fast?
Blocks the secretion.
Of what?
Renin and aldosterone.
Which is going to then allow me to do what? By doing what? Peeing. So it's going to eventually have an effect on the renal tubules and allow me to get rid of excess water. So it's one of those second things. So it's going to stop me from holding on to more water, renin and angiotensin pathway, and allow me to get rid of more water. Yes? So think, what do I have to do to lower my blood pressure? If that hormone's going to allow me to lower my blood pressure, you have to somehow have an effect on the kidneys, and this is kind of an indirect effect because it's sort of going to inhibit another pathway and allow water to be released. Yes? So they talk about the pineal gland. What's a pineal gland? Yeah, I already said, right down here we see gonatocorticoids, and then the catecholamines. Everything is in table 16.3 on page 616. So again, general definition of those guys. Who's the next guy in your book? What does he do for a living, or she? I don't know if it's a he or she. It makes a hormone called melatonin. And what's melatonin do? Makes you sleepy. Remember, sleep is important because what do I have to do during sleep? Road work, right? I have to pack those little packages of chemicals in my rods and cones, and I have to fix like damaged axons. I have work to do. So sleep is important. The book then goes on to talk about other endocrine glands. By the way, I'm not going to make you memorize this, but since I have the diagram up, I do want to point it out. Please notice what stress can do to you. Stress can cause the release, premature release, excess release of some of these hormones that we're talking about that help to regulate some of these systems. So prolonged stress through the secondary effects of some of these hormones can cause problems with things like high blood pressure.
This may be a really dumb question.
Go ahead, ask it.
Can you be stressed without, like, knowing you're stressed? Okay.
Yeah, because some people wear their stress on their sleeve, and others just sort of internalize their stress, and others do not know about it. Well, that's a little bit different. That's a little bit different. But yes, we can. The outward effects of stress can be different in different individuals. Yes.
I know, like, sometimes people with, like, anxiety or, like, panic sometimes don't know, like, it's not very clear to them what's causing
Correct. And a lot of times,
anxiety or the panic attack.
yeah, and a lot of times chemical imbalances can be attributed to those situations. So yes, it's a fine chemical balance. It could be genetic or just environmental causes could affect people in different ways. It's tough, you put a genetic label on everything. Well, it might be, but you also have to think environmental as well. So other endocrine glands and tissues. Good old pancreas. Now we're going to talk about the pancreas again when we talk about the digestive system. But the pancreas is also mentioned in the endocrine system because it has groups of cells that make hormones. The two hormones in question are produced by two separate groups of cells that I'm going to find in the pancreatic tissue. Beta cells. And when you look at these guys under the microscope, it's going to be very difficult to see the difference between a beta cell and an alpha cell. They're not going to jump out at you. These are different in that picture. Do you know why? Yeah, they have been labeled very specifically to show one cell red and one cell. You're not going to see that in your slides. Everybody's going to be the same color. So don't get caught up with not being able to differentiate between alpha and beta cells, but you should be able to find this circular area. And that circular area is called the islets of Langerhans. And probably a nice German fellow found them for us many years ago. That's, if you look at the pic, and you can see it better in your textbook. This one is a little more fuzzy, but if you follow this along, see it? It's actually in a circle, in this circle in the center. You can see it more defined in the textbook, and that's figure 16.18 on page 618. But in those islets, we're going to find these two types of cells. Again, beta cells produce insulin for us, and the alpha cells produce a hormone called glucagon. Now, it's alpha cells, yes. That little squiggly symbol up there that looks like a fish, that's alpha. So, it does? Well, yeah, like a sideways A. Oh, yeah, like a little A almost, doesn't it? Okay, so what are they doing for me? Now, you know, of course, throughout the textbook, we see all sorts of feedback mechanisms, so we might as well throw that diagram up there while we describe what the two do. Remember, there's going to be some sort of stimulus, and where do we usually find the stimulus when we're talking about the endocrine system? Where's the stimulus located? Say it out loud. You said in the blood. So if blood glucose levels start to go up, same trip to Friendly's, same Sunday, not only did my calcium levels go up, but what else went up? Yeah, my glucose levels, lots of carbohydrates into my circulatory system. What am I going to do with those carbohydrates? I want to keep them at a certain level. Now I don't want to break them down. What do I want to do with them? I don't want to store. Well, if I eat too many of those Sundays, I'm going to end up storing the excess. I want to use them to make energy. But who makes energy? How am I going to? They're floating around in the circulatory system. What do I have to do? Where do we make energy? Inside the cells. So I have to get the glucose from floating around in my circulatory system that I digested and absorbed from my delicious Sunday from Friendly's, and I have to get it into my cells. So that's the stimulus here. Increased blood glucose levels. The pancreas is going to help me with that by producing what? Insulin. Insulin is going to help stimulate what? The uptake of glucose. Insulin does not make glucose. Insulin does not alter glucose. All insulin does is what? Yeah, allow the cells to bring it in. Then we're going to go through a series of reactions, which we're going to talk about in chapter 25. 25. Called what? Cellular respiration. But insulin's going to help me get it in. So sometimes people will say, well, insulin helps to decrease blood glucose levels. Yes, but do you understand what that means? Insulin helps pull it out of the plasma and bring it into the cell so I can use it. So that's what insulin's going to do.
That makes sense because when you check glucose, you're testing the blood.
You're testing the plasma.
Right.
See, blood is amazing. We can find out so many things because it's a transport system. So if I want to find out if my patient has the proper amount of anything, most anything, I could draw a tube of blood and do different tests on it. So blood plasma gives us a lot. And it's the easiest way to determine whether metabolic function is normal. So we've established normal levels of all these different things in blood plasma. Less invasive, right? I draw a tube of blood. I don't have to cut anything off, right? I don't have to get any tissue. I don't have to go look under the microscope. Well, sometimes I look under the microscope when I draw blood. But I can find out a lot about my patient. And that's how the nervous system gets signals as well, by blood levels. When the blood glucose level starts to come back down, I'm going to decrease the release of insulin from the pancreas. Now, if I skip a meal, I didn't eat breakfast, I still need that glucose in my circulatory system, about 90 milligrams per deciliter at all given times. You don't have to write that down. So how am I going to make sure that I have that amount of glucose flowing around in the circulatory system when my break down my stored stuff? Okay? The easiest stored stuff to break down is glycogen. And glycogen lives where? Inside the cells where? In the liver, in the muscles. Okay? So the other hormone, glucagon, is going to be released. And that's going to stimulate a couple of things. But with respect to getting glucose levels in order, it's going to stimulate what? The breakdown of who? Glycogen. What else can I break down to get energy? We talked about stored forms of energy. Besides, some of us are saying, oh, the extra Sundays. Yeah. So it also stimulates lipogenesis, and lipolysis, the breaking down of lipid stores as well. Insulin, that was the one where I'm going to suck in the glucose, right? What else does it do besides help the cell get in glucose? It's also going to help the cell store that glucose if there's extra. So how do I store extra glucose? Well, one, we just said, glycogen. But what if I have even more? Lipogenesis. So insulin not only helps glucose get into the cells, but some of its other secondary effects are going to be storage, fat storage.
I have a question. I know this place I work with for diabetics say that you have to give a lot of them insulin. There's also another shot that the doctor gives them. You get the insulin and then they're given another shot so it makes sure it doesn't. Huh? Like you get too much. You can't give too much insulin, so the other one kind of counteracts it.
I don't know.
How that. I was just wondering how that don't the cell.
I don't know. I can't think of what that might be.
I know one of the residents, she gives them he has really high blood sugar in the morning, it's 400 and something.
Wow.
And so she has to give him a certain amount of units of insulin, and then she gives him another shot of something so it doesn't drop it down really
Too
low.
far. Yep. I don't know what that is.
It could be short acting versus long acting.
Yeah, maybe.
Long acting is going to help him for the whole day, and short acting is going to help for that first meal that he's going to get. There
Maybe.
are different kinds of insulin.
Right.
Usually some diabetics will be on both short acting and long acting.
Yeah.
So that might be what it is. Interesting. All right, they give a little spiel on homeostatic imbalances and diabetes. So again, general understanding of what diabetes is, problems with a couple of different things. A, you can have problems making insulin, not make it right, doesn't work properly. But the other problem you might have is problems with the receptors for insulin on your cells. And usually that's a problem in type 2 diabetes, later onset diabetes. It's not necessarily an insulin problem, it's my receptors being able to recognize insulin and do what they're supposed to do for a living.
So what about when you have gestational diabetes?
Yeah, that's just mess up my hormones enough so that my whole insulin glucagon thing doesn't work well.
Okay.
And then when my hormones get back to normal, that usually helps yeah. So they also talk about gonads and placenta. And we see that those also make some hormones for us. Estrogen, gonads are the reproductive organs, the place where I'm going to make my reproductive cells. So in females, ovaries. In males, testes. So those cells that actually are helping to mature those reproductive cells, also can make hormones to help mature those reproductive cells. Estrogen, progesterone, testosterone are some of the hormones we see produced by gonads. Now these hormones can also, just like we've talked about this whole class, have another effect, yes? So they can affect other things, like bone formation, for example. So a general understanding of those guys. Hormone secretion by other organs, adipose tissue, the gastrointestinal tract, the heart, and there's my ANP. I don't know why I went through it over there and messed us up with the adrenals. Yep.
Do we need to know all of them?
Yes. You need to know the hormones that they make and their target. The kidneys make a hormone called erythropoietin. And that's going to help me produce what? Erythro, yep, red blood cells. So on page 622, there's a nice little table, 16.5, that helps kind of give us a nice shortened version of some of these as well. The skeleton, the skin, the thymus, also on that chart as well. And again, just general information from there. The hormone that it makes, and some general information as to the effects. Developmental aspects, don't worry about it, and we're done with chapter 16. So what?
So, in that chapter, you said our favorite things are those tables. 'Cause it's gonna bring.
Exactly. It's going to help bring that information down small for you. So when we come into class on